Hello, everyone. I believe we're live on the air now. This is basically a virtual happy hour being sponsored by the Division 40 Society for Clinical Neuroscience Scientific Advisory Committee and the Early Career Neuropsychology Committee. So just to give a little plug for the Early Career Committee, we're basically a subcommittee within Division 40 Society for Clinical Neuroscience. We're open to anybody basically who is postdoc up to 10 years out. So if you're interested in joining, we have a Facebook page, we have a listserv. You can find information on how to join us basically through the Division 40 website, and we'd love to have more people in our group. So right now, I'm going to also, I just wanted to mention there's a Q&A ability for Google Hangout. So if you look to the right of your screen, you should see some buttons. If you hit the Q&A button, I believe you should be able to send us any questions you may have as the Hangout's proceeding. And we'll try to bring those up as they are relevant. I'm making sure I have this feature active now. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Karin. Will be our first speaker. Let her introduce herself. I know she's at the University of Iowa. We appreciate her and April being part of this Google Hangout. Okay, take it away.
Sure. Hi, so I'm Karin Hoth. I'm a neuropsychologist at the University of Iowa. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry here, and I'm a member of the Science Advisory Committee. So I'm going to share a bit about the pilot award, both the process, what it is, and tell you a little bit about the process of selection. So just some basic summary information about what the award is and the process of selection. So we have two one-year grants that are up to $15,000, and part of that money is to support presentation of the result of the pilot project at the APA convention. So part of that is for travel. The goal is really to support people during the early career period to be able to generate pilot data that has the potential to go on and lead to future funding. So it can be in a basic or a clinical area that's relevant to the goals of Division 40, so within the area of neuropsychology. Generally broad goal, so we do get applications in a range of different topics. So the definition of who's eligible, basically you need to be a member, associate, or a student affiliate of SCN and be within 10 years of getting your doctoral degree. The goal is basically to generate a project that's feasible and innovative, that can be done obviously within the amount of money, the $50,000. So I think that's key, and we'll see what April has to say. But within the grant mechanism, I think that's something that's really important to be thinking about what fits well for this particular mechanism. Let's see. Also identify a mentor for the project. So as the application goes in, there's a key mentor identified. The application materials are online, and I'll just say the website if you don't know it. It's www.scn40.org, and if you go under the committee section, you can get a link to the Science Advisory Committee and get to the materials. Also welcome to, you can email me as well if you need any help with that. Okay, so let's see. Basically the application consists of, there's a face page, there's a abstract, research plan that isn't to go over 4 pages long, and you cover the aims, background, significance, innovation, design methods, and the timeline also, given that, as I mentioned, it's a year-long project with the goal of moving on to a bigger project. I think that's important. So the application is due March 15th, and basically the process of review, it's the Scientific Advisory Committee that reviews the grants and selects the grant. As I mentioned, 2 are selected. It's modeled after an NIH review, and the criteria and scoring system that we use are modeled over the 1 through 9 criteria that NIH uses, and we do a conference call where basically proceeds just as a study section would proceed. So at the beginning, we basically, as a committee, are able to identify any conflicts of interest before reviewers are assigned, dual relationships or any potential conflict of interest. There's a primary and secondary reviewer that are assigned to each grant. We submit our scores, and based on that, a preliminary impact score is generated, and about half of the applications are then discussed during a phone conference call. Proceeds similar to NIH review groups, where the primary reviewer describes the project, key things that influenced their score. The secondary reviewer can chime in, and then there's a discussion that goes from there. And at the end of the discussion, everybody on the committee provides their score, their impact score. And I should also mention, if there's a particular application that one of the committee members would like to discuss, they can ask it to be discussed during the call. And basically, then the ranking is made from there, and the top 2 scores are awarded. So let's see. Shall I pause there with the description and jump over to April, or should we? I suppose if questions come in, you would just jump in, right? Is that how this will?
Exactly. I haven't seen any questions yet, so we'll let April take over now. And I've actually served with her on the NAN Clinical Research Grant Committee, so I know that she's very knowledgeable about this subject area. So, April, you want to take it away?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is April Thames. I'm an assistant professor at UCLA. And I believe I was a recipient of the SCN grant in 2014. I'm pretty sure that was the correct year. But I basically had a project where, you come up with an idea and you think, where does this project fit? And it just so happened that at that time, SCN came out with this pilot grant announcement. And I thought, oh, this is so cool, because I can actually, I knew it wasn't a project I could get funded through the NIH because I didn't have enough preliminary data to support it. I really needed to start out with a pilot project. So that's how this opportunity came about. So I'm extremely grateful for being a recipient of the grant. It actually has helped me a lot. We presented some findings from the SCN project at this year's INS. And we also published a paper recently on some of the data that was collected as part of the pilot projects. So that's just 2 examples of how, the support through SCN really helps to carry, these projects through. And so now I'm hoping to use some of this preliminary data to apply for greater level of funding. So that's sort of my, I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, obviously, but also interested in health disparities. So a lot of my work sort of focuses around some of the social determinants as well as chronic disease that disproportionately affect certain underrepresented groups. So my work is sort of centered around that globally. But as Dr. Hill said, I've served on the NAN Grants Committee, so I certainly have had both from the reviewer's perspective and actually the applicant as well. So happy to answer any questions.
Okay. So I guess I can start off with some questions. First, Dr. Hoth, do you want to cover any more about the pilot grant application itself before we get into questions? Or?
I don't know. other than talking some about just the general criteria and NIH criteria, that kind of thing, I do have a few tidbits and thoughts as I considered for this particular mechanism, what are kind of pitfalls. So I'd be happy to share a few thoughts that I had.
Sure. You do that, and then I'll have a couple of questions I can ask you and Dr. Thames.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Well, I kind of alluded to this before, that I think, and April mentioned that too, that the fit for this particular mechanism and the amount of money, I think, is key to keep in mind throughout preparing the application. So as far as the presentation of the approach, the resources that are available, you know, one of the things in the reviewer's mind, you're thinking, is this going to be feasible within a year with this much money? And that's kind of in the back of your head. You're looking, obviously, for good science, but that's something to really lay out in your application, how it will be doable. If it's adding to an existing project in a certain way, what is the new piece that you plan to use the award money to do, and then how does that fit into what your next step will be? And I think when that comes through, that really strengthens an application. Similarly, the resources being available, you know, just not assuming that the reviewer knows your setting. It's kind of general grant writing, but I think particularly with this amount of money, being sure that you explain, here are the resources that exist in my setting that I can take advantage of, and here's how I'll use this money to augment those resources, you know, and then laying out the plan. So it's kind of one of the main thoughts that I had. So as well as in general, as I mentioned, just thinking about what the NIH criteria are, significance and innovation, and touching on those throughout.
Yeah, that's definitely something I took from being a reviewer on the opposite side, which is, you know, if you want to be really good at grant writing, I strongly encourage people who want that skill set. You can volunteer to be a reviewer for these different organizations like NAN, INS, Division 40. And it's a great way to kind of learn basically what people are looking for in grants. It was kind of, I thought it was a great experience for me personally. But kind of how you're saying, I think a lot of times emphasis for the reviewers is on bang for the buck, but also they kind of realize this is a small amount of money, so they don't expect you to, you know, be able to like recruit 400 people. Really, the idea is like getting a reasonable amount of data that's justifiable and doable with the budget you're proposing, with the idea that this will kind of be a springboard to a larger grant. And I think sometimes people don't really get that idea. They think you have to like design and submit the perfect study, and that's, you want to submit a methodologically sound study, but they don't expect you to be able to basically, you know, conclusively answer the question probably with the amount of data you're going to get. Any thoughts about that? Or
I agree. I mean, both with the feasibility aspect, that's always the main question as a reviewer of grants that I have is this person really going to be able to do this in a year? And working with students on grant proposals, even myself, I remember feeling like I had to do this very ambitious study in order for reviewers to get excited about it. And what I learned, and you know, each time I write a small pilot grant, I have to remember is that it doesn't have to be the groundbreaking next thing. This is just an opportunity to demonstrate feasibility of moving on to something bigger. So I think keeping that in mind, another sort of thought that at least comes to me as an applicant is that I will revise my specific aims probably 15 to 20 times at least. And I literally have like version 18 of the specific aims, because it really requires going back and going over it, having other people review it, and that's where planning, I think, for the grant is really important. So that's just something in thinking about not just the feasibility, but are you being clear about the feasibility for that?
I totally agree. Dr. Hoth, any thoughts about that? Or
Well, I would agree as far as having multiple people read it. And one thing that I have come to realize or be less cautious about is I also ask others that I may know who have written similar types of grants, like smaller foundation grants, for example. You know, would you be willing to share? So sort of using those resources that you have to get examples, asking them to read your stuff and have it be a two-way street. I think I'm the first time I was working on a grant, I was asked one or two people and was a little more cautious about just going out and really being open to getting a range of feedback.
I think that's the mistake most people make when they do this, is they don't give themselves enough time to revise the submission, get feedback. Everybody's busy, particularly at the postdoc level. But if this is something you put together the week before the grant's due, you probably have a low probability of getting funded, because you got to get feedback, like April was saying. Maybe the specific aims and the methodology is the most important part, because if it's not really clear where somebody can kind of get exactly what you want to do and why from a pretty quick read, the probability is that reviewer's not going to, they're going to move on to something else that's more clear, another grant that they see as being better or stronger.
And sometimes it helps to get somebody outside of the field of your immediate, if possible, to review the grant, because I know that I sometimes get caught up in jargon or technical terms that, say, somebody in public health or sociology may not fully understand. And the way that I try to write specific aims is if I am explaining the study to somebody who has no idea really about the technical aspects of the project. And this is where it can get a little dangerous when projects cross over to fields such as neuroimaging or genetics or biomarkers. It can start to become very technical, and the big picture of what is it that you're really doing or what you're looking at, what is this technique measuring, that sometimes gets lost, I've noticed. And I have personally read applications where I find that the applicant may have an interesting study, but they're so bogged down with the details of the cool technique that it really takes away the big picture. So it's almost like, you can't, whatever that saying is, see the forest from the trees. It's too much detail. And losing that big picture is a danger, I think, in writing grant applications, where they're not a danger in writing a manuscript. And that's why the planning is important.
And that's kind of a danger of these smaller pilot grant awards and foundation grants, is because you have these, pretty short limits on the amount you can write. So in some ways, if it's a very ambitious study or if it's something that uses a very novel technique, like, it's kind of hard to describe it, where the typical reviewer who may or may not have a background in the area would kind of understand what you're trying to do. All right, so I've got a question from the audience here, and I apologize to some people if the Q&A feature isn't working. I think we have some issues with it. But we did get one question. First one is, how many people should you ask to review the application for you, and how many reviewers is too many?
As many people as are willing. That's what I think. If you can get, I think the more people you can get to look at it, the better. And I mean, obviously, people that can really provide solid feedback. But I have found that it doesn't matter how many times I've read my own aims and I think they're good to go. I will send it out to somebody and they'll get back to me, and there is something major that I overlooked. So I guess my answer would be anybody that is willing.
Yeah, and somebody always catches a typo too that you've read it 10 times and didn't see. That's kind of my experience with this.
Yeah.
I think one thing to keep in mind too is that you'll get completely contradictory feedback.
It's true.
With what should be emphasized, or just differing opinions about what's key, what should be brought to the forefront, with getting a lot of opinions. And I think it's probably something that one forever works on, is coming to, their own view of the grant and being consistent with their viewpoint, but one of the people who taught a grant writing seminar that I took as a postdoc would say that if it's good to know what those thoughts would be. If it came into one person's mind who read it, at least you're aware of that, and you can keep that in mind as you go forward, whether or not you make the exact change that was suggested by one individual person, because otherwise you could really be going back and forth in your revision. But if you have the wide range of thoughts that come into a reader's mind, then you're in a better position to make your own decisions and sort of find your way forward with it.
And it was always interesting to me seeing that on the reviewer side too, that you could have a great grant and one reviewer loves it, and for whatever reason the other reviewer doesn't get it. So, and because of that, it's probably not going to score well in that group, and it's not going to get funded. But just because a grant gets rejected from one foundation or one organization, just recycle it, resubmit it somewhere else. If you think it's a good grant, take the extra time to work on it, but definitely don't let, just because it's not funded at one agency or one foundation organization, if you think it's a good idea, keep working on it and keep submitting it.
And that's where I think that's a great point, just to add in looking at the mission of the organization that's actually funding the grant. Because, for example, SCN has a specific mission, as does NAN has a specific mission. And if your project, or NIH, depending on which institute, but if your grant does not meet the goal of that particular request for application or program announcement, that's really important. I've seen too many people try to fit a square peg in a round hole with their grant application, and it doesn't get funded. It's not because it's not a good project, but for that particular organization, it does not meet their mission. So it's really important for those out there that are applying for the SCN grant, look at the mission and really think about whether or not your project meets that mission, and not just in a sort of convoluted way or down the road. Think about specifically, is this targeting what SCN is looking for, because that will increase the likelihood that it will be funded.
That's a good point. So I got another question from the audience. Does SCN offer any mentorship or resources to help grant writing for this program, or grant writing more generally? Are you aware of any mentoring or any resources SCN provides for kind of improving grantsmanship?
Well, I'm not aware as far as this specific program for our committee's involvement is really reviewing. So certainly any specific questions we field related to the application itself, that isn't in the instructions. I'm not aware, at least with our committee, there's not a specific mentorship piece. How about within the early career committee?
We've been talking about trying to set up some kind of mentorship program, but I would say generally if you're at a larger postdoc site, somebody there is writing grants, somebody there is doing grants, if you're any kind of academic medical center. So just reach out to those people and ask if you could meet with them, do lunch or something, see if they'd be willing to give you some mentorship on grant writing. That's one resource. I think a lot of people don't take advantage of people that are kind of right around them. What do you think, April?
I agree. I think that most people, if they poke around their institution's website, they can find several resources. NIH has a ton in terms of how to write grants, and I think getting samples of previous grants that were successfully funded is always really helpful. But I often also I think that that's helpful to a certain degree, but I really think having a team of investigators, like a mentor, and working with them, having a lot of people review your grant who are experienced in grant writing, that is key, more so than just saying, oh, can I borrow your application that got funded last year so that I could write mine, and that's it. So I really think that looking at I was very fortunate as a postdoc. My postdoc mentor was a phenomenal grant writer, and I learned a lot from him just looking at his thought process of why did he write this way? Okay, so he changed my wording on this aim to this. Why did he do that? So asking him, what was your thought process when you did that? That was extremely helpful moving forward with other grants for me.
I'm actually always kind of amazed that people who are very successful grant writers can have very different styles. There's not one way to write a grant, like you're saying. So kind of the more exposure you get to the ways different people do it, kind of you can develop your own style out of that. So I actually got a message from Katie Block, who's the chair for the Early Career Committee, and she said that there's an upcoming grant workshop at APA. I think it's probably sponsored by Division 40, because she said it's going to include small group sessions where you can ask questions to neuropsychologists specifically in the field who have experience in grant writing. So if anybody's going to be at the APA convention coming up this summer that would definitely be and is interested in improving their grant writing skills, that would be a resource you'd have. All right, so I have a couple of questions as well. We'll start with Dr. Hoth. What was your first grant, and what did you learn writing and submitting it?
I worked on F32 award, which is an NIH mechanism to support. Actually, that's not true. It was a T32 during graduate school. So career development mechanism that was linked to a faculty member's project. And with that project, I would say a key was really developing what was I going to be looking at within my project that was separate from the larger environment. So I kind of coming back to the idea of the feasibility for this project. If you're linked up with another larger environment, I worked on trying to delineate a doable piece within my bigger environment.
Okay. All right. Dr. Thames, this is for you. What do you wish you had known before you wrote your first grant?
I wish I would have known that I should have consulted with I should have received statistical consultation first before starting the process. So when I wrote my first grant, it was a little small grant through the UCLA Center for AIDS Research, and that was while I was a postdoc, and it was a small amount of money. And I remember that I got through pretty much writing big sections of the grant, and I just pieced together some analyses that I thought made sense for testing hypotheses related to the aims. And then I realized that, oh my goodness, I totally omitted before, I mean, it didn't go out, but I completely omitted like a power analysis, which is critical to grant applications. So then when I went to go get statistical consultation, they said, when is your grant due? And I basically was like, tomorrow, which is soon. And they said, oh no, you should have come to us. And I remember frantically writing all night long because I had not paid attention to the level of detail that was needed in the statistical consultation, in that statistical analysis section. I sort of, brushed it off. And I wish I would have known that. Now when I write grants, I try to start by determining how many subjects do I need to really see whether or not whatever I'm saying has an effect or a relationship or whatever. So I think getting the statistical consultation early on is something I wish I knew that I take with me now.
And you always postulate the classic medium effect size, because
yeah, oh yeah, and then it's like small.
All right, so this is yeah. Say something, Dr. Hoth.
I hadn't actually. I think I was laughing.
Okay. So this is for either one of you. Having served on grant review committees, what are common mistakes you see, and what are things committee members ding grant applications on that writers may not know? So we've covered this a little bit, but if you can think of anything else that are kind of common things you've seen when you reviewed grants that probably people who aren't on those committees wouldn't think about.
I would say I think the biggest piece that I have seen applicants get dinged for is the feasibility that we initially talked about, because I always think about, as was mentioned earlier by Dr. Holt, can this person really do this in a year's time? Because you have to figure that you don't really have a year. You probably have 7 months by the time you get your IRB approval. There's always a problem that's going to happen with IRB. You just have to assume, and research always moves at a slower pace than what people think. So when looking at someone who's saying, I'm going to run 100 subjects, that's near impossible, even with the most well-oiled machine of centers. Even if they're working within a center or project and everything is up and running, that's probably the only way it could happen, and if it's a very brief assessment. But for the most part, I've seen applications where they're proposing, the applicant's proposing a neurocognitive battery that lasts all day, and they're going to get 150, 200 people in a year. And that's, and as a reviewer, I question, is this really possible? And more often than not, it doesn't, they don't meet the target numbers. So I think that that's something now review committees are paying more close attention to. Also, I would say another piece, at least that I will ding an applicant on, is if I don't think that they've spent enough time thinking about operational definitions of their variables. And this goes back to very basic research methods 101, is how are you defining your predictor and your outcome variables. So if you say a term like stress, or you say a term like resiliency, that is defined in so many different ways depending on the field and the investigator, then how are you defining that? And so I've noticed that applications, if they're not clear how their variables are going to be measured and defined, that's one area that gets dinged, and that has a lot to do with the clarity piece and also the analysis section.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about the sample size issue. I mean, sometimes less is more if you have a limited budget. Don't try to promise the world if you really can't do that.
Right.
And
describing what you'll do with the data in detail, this I think is particularly tricky in the smaller length, like we talked about. But what exactly, just laying out really clearly, this hypothesis will be tested this way using this, statistical approach, and then capturing pitfalls. And if that isn't true, we'll be able to look at the data in another way, so that the reviewer knows that if X doesn't happen, the team has thought about how to maximize the data that they would be collecting. Go ahead.
I was going to say another thing that people don't always, I think, realize is that they see the dollar amount being offered, and they always think they have to ask for kind of the max budget that's available. And so at least, I don't know if every committee works like this, but at least a couple I've been on, they want to fund as many good projects as possible. So sometimes if you have a good idea but doesn't require a lot of money, you can still write a small grant for that. And if it's even only a couple $1,000s, sometimes it kind of fits into where they can fund more than like 2 grants, because they have some leftover funds and they want to use it all that year. You can kind of sneak in and get a funded grant, and that's something to put on your CV, and it helps you kind of develop as a researcher. So you don't always have to, have a huge grant that's asking for all the money available. If your idea doesn't support that, it's okay to ask for what you need and kind of go with a smaller idea sometimes. All right, and again, this one's for either one of you. How has grant funding changed your research and professional development or career trajectory? Have you benefited from grant writing, having funded research?
I would say one thing that comes to mind is just having more resources and more data to present and get out and start to meet more people within the field. That sort of spirals on itself to generate other ideas and linking up more with the community. You can, of course, attend conferences and, without grant funding, but I do think that that's one thing it allowed me to have more flexibility in being able to present more broadly and meet people in the field.
April?
For me, I wouldn't have a job if I didn't get this small grant funding early on. I mean, seriously, my entire career has been built upon these small pilot grants. I mean, I started off with pilot grants, and that's what allowed me to have data to present for my K award, and I believe that's largely in part why I received a K, was because I had demonstrated that I had funding in the past, and I also had preliminary data available that was unique, and that would not have happened if it weren't for organizations like SCN who provide these pilot opportunities. So it really, I really honestly say that these small pilot grants are the catalyst for many, I think, junior investigators, particularly in academic medicine environments where that's how we survive. We survive on grants. So this has helped me a lot.
Okay. Well, I greatly appreciate both your times. I know you're busy clinical researchers. Anything else you wanted to add? All right.
I'm just going to say, feel free, if anybody has any other specific questions about the mechanism, you can feel free to email me too.
Okay. Great. Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this joint venture, this virtual happy hour, co-hosted by Division 40 SAC and the Early Career Neuropsychology Committee. If you're an early career neuropsychologist, 10 years or less out of your doctoral program, look us up. We're happy to have you as a member. We offer a lot of resources. We have a listserv. We have a Facebook page. So add on the Facebook page, and we'll try to do more of these in the future. I want to thank Dr. Thames again and Dr. Hoth for taking their time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me.
All right, thank you. And I'm Ben Hill. I'm the Science Officer for the Early Career Committee. If you have any questions, you can email me at bdhill@southalabama.edu or find me on the Psychology Department webpage for University of South Alabama. All right, thank you both. I'm going to close the talk now, okay?
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Have a good night.